Hello my dear friends and welcome to StudyIQ. I am Joycey Joy and today in this lecture we will discuss about the economic growth history of China. Let us first look into the current affair. China celebrates the 40th anniversary of reform and opening up policy it adopted. So the reform and opening up policy of China is considered to be the policy that has made all the changes in the China's economy. So China is celebrating the 40th anniversary of adoption of reform and opening up policy. In case of India, in the year 1991, we adopted the new economic policy or the liberalization, privatization and globalization. We decided to open up our economy to the world economy. So that was a significant decision taken in the Indian economy. So likewise, China is celebrating the 40th anniversary of reform and opening up policy it has adopted. And this transformed China from an agricultural backwater into a manufacturing powerhouse. Now the world is seeing China as a manufacturing powerhouse. So this tag of manufacturing powerhouse take all its credit from the reform and opening up policy China has adopted. This is the current affair and based on this we will have a brief idea about the economic growth history of China. Now coming to the present status of China. China is the world's largest foreign reserves holder. China has around $3.05 trillion of forex reserves or foreign reserves in the month of October 2018. So this makes China the holder of world's largest foreign reserves. And this has become possible for China because of its export expansion policies. So China's economy was focusing on large-scale manufacturing through which it expanded the exports from the country, and this is the reason China has this huge reserve of foreign exchange. Primarily, foreign exchange can be earned by a country through its trade with other countries, that is the exports and imports. When you import more commodities from a country, you have to pay foreign reserves, and when you make exports, you receive foreign reserves. And we have already discussed this in a previous lecture. We have seen how the current account of China has a huge forex surplus, or there is a current account surplus for China. But in case of India, we have a current account deficit. That means the quantity of imports is higher than the quantity of exports in case of India. But in case of China, the quantity of exports is more than the quantity of imports. And this has made China become the world's largest forex reserves holder. Now, secondly, it is the second largest economy in the world. So, the size of the economy is calculated on the basis of GDP. GDP is gross domestic product. It is the monetary value of all the goods and services produced in the economy within a financial year. So, in terms of GDP, China is the second largest economy in the world with a GDP of $12.2 trillion in the year 2017. Now, third is the share of its world economy. Its share of world economy is 18.2% in 2017. This means it holds a major share or a very good proportion of share in the world economy. But in 1978, the share was merely 1.8%. So it was in the year 1978, China adopted the reform and opening up policy. So we have seen that it is celebrating 40th year of adoption of this policy, that is reform and opening up policy. So in the 40th year of the policy, the China's share of world economy has grown to 18.2% compared to 1.8% in 1978. Now, all this has been possible for China because of the economic policies adopted by the economy. And for that reason, the growth history of China is a lesson for India to learn from. Now, let us understand some of the contradictions in Chinese economy or in the Chinese political system. The first contradiction is in the political ideology of the country. So, the ruling party of the country holds a communist egalitarian ideology. So, the ideology or political ideology of the country is largely that of a communist ideology or egalitarian ideology. Egalitarian means equal. Everyone should be considered equal. Everyone must be distributed resources equally, that is egalitarian ideology. But in reality, we see that Chinese economy or China is hugely unequal capitalism driven society. Because of the growth of the manufacturing sector, it has made Chinese economy hugely unequal, and it is also a capitalism driven society. So capitalism is exactly opposite to communism. So here we see a contradiction. And also egalitarian society. The ideology is egalitarian, but we will see there is an unequal distribution of wealth and resources. So this is the contradiction in the political ideology of the country. Now, second is the divergent interest. The divergent interest between the urban middle class and with those of peasants and migrant workers. So there is a divergent interest between both these classes. Now, the third contradiction is in the internet users. China has a huge population and it also has the world's largest number of internet users. So the number of internet users in China is around 722 million, and it is the world's largest number of internet users. And it also accounts for more than 40% of global e-commerce transaction. That is because of the huge manufacturing activities taking place in the country. 40% of the world's e-commerce activities takes place in China alone. So, on one side is the huge number of internet users and huge volume of e-commerce transactions. But on the other side, what is the contradiction? It is also one of the world's most censored digital environments. So, these are some of the contradictions regarding China. Now coming to a major policy that China had adopted, it is called crossing the river by feeling the stones. So this is a critical tool in achieving this economic progress by China. Now what is this crossing the river by feeling the stones policy? This is an approach which is characterized by experimentation and local policy tinkering. That means based on conducting experimentations, a policy would be adopted. That means in order to establish what worked best in practice before it was adopted at the national level. So a policy was conducted on a pilot basis initially, and if it becomes successful only, it would be adopted at the national level. So it was an experimentation based policy approach that the China had adopted, and this also largely helped the country in achieving all this economic growth, because the country did not waste any financial resources or any resources for implementing a project nationwide. But instead, what did the country do? On a pilot basis, it was adopted in a local level. And if the policy became successful, only then it was adopted at the national level. So this is called the crossing the river by feeling the stones policy adopted by China. Now, we will discuss what was the role of special economic zones in the development of China or in the economic progress of the country. The special economic zones promoted the economic growth of the country. It attracted a lot of foreign investments, and it also helped in transforming many fishing villages into a global manufacturing hub. For example, Shenzhen. This was a fishing village. Now it is turned into a global manufacturing hub. So this was due to the huge volume of foreign investments received by the country initially. But later we will see that this capital investments or the capital account of China is experiencing an outflow of foreign investment, but at the same time the current account, it is experiencing a surplus of foreign reserve. So this happened later on, but initially a lot of foreign investment came into the economy because of the promotion of special economic zones by the country. Now we will see what are the highlights of the governance policy adopted by China. China adopted a problem-solving approach. This means that the leaders were more responsive to socio-economic challenges. So the policy was that of a problem-solving approach. Leaders were responsive to the challenges at the society, at the economic level, etc. And the government also introduced various reforms in administration and governance. For example, introduction of term limits and mandatory retirement ages for officials. So such type of reforms were adopted by the administration. And there was also internal report cards. So internal report cards were made mandatory, and this was to evaluate the performance of local bureaucrats. So evaluation of the performance of the bureaucrats was mandatory through internal report cards, and this promoted the idea of good governance in the country. And another policy adopted by the country with regard to governance was that the promotions and the bonuses of the employees, the government servants, were linked to the meeting of economic and environmental targets. So the government would have fixed some economic targets or some environmental targets for the officers or the employees. So the bonuses and promotions were linked to these targets. So these were the features of governance policy adopted by China. Now regarding the developmental strategy adopted by the country, the emphasis was given on outcome rather than on ideology. We have seen this in the beginning itself. The ideology or the political ideology of the country is largely based on communism and egalitarian society. But in reality we see that there is unequal distribution as well as capitalistic feature. So the emphasis was given more on outcome than ideology. For example, we will see there is a lack of political participation in China. But in case of India, we will see that there is political representation of poor. But if we compare both these countries, China and India, where China has a lack of political participation, but in India there is a political representation of poor. But in case of delivery of basic public goods like roads, drainages, schools, etc., which country is better? China is better. So this highlights the fact that emphasis on outcome rather than ideology will help in bringing more development. So India has a clear-cut political ideology. It is based on democratic principles. But China gave more emphasis on outcome than ideology, and therefore the rate of development is also high in China. Now coming to the Xi Jinping era, let us see what is the status of China. Now the legacy of reform and opening up continues to be relevant in China even now. But there are some breakages from the policy of reform and opening up. So we will see what are they. There is a formal commitment to further economic liberalization in China. But in contrast to that, there is the ongoing trade war with the United States. So even though China has committed for an economic liberalization, the trade war with the US does not seem to be an example of economic liberalization by China. And secondly, there is a contradiction between the state control of the economy and also the embracement of free markets. So there is a contradiction whether state has to control or own the economy, or it should be given to free market forces like the demand and supply. And thirdly is the socialism with Chinese characteristics. We have seen the political ideology of China is to hold communism and also egalitarian society. But in reality, it is contradicted by capitalistic driven characteristics. So we can say that socialism in China has its own Chinese characteristics. And next concern is regarding the recent scrapping of the presidential term limit. So recently the presidential term limit was scrapped, and this will enable Mr. Xi Jinping to potentially continue in the office indefinitely. So this can impact the good governance of the country. And China emphasizes on self-reliance, and it also wants the threats passed by hostile foreign forces. And China has in public adopted a policy of peaceful economic integration. But the ongoing trade war with the United States does not make its peaceful economic integration policy a reality. So the peaceful economic integration policy announced by China is challenged by the trade war, and this trade war could even degenerate into a new Cold War. So this is another concern, and we have seen that China had earlier adopted a policy of crossing the river by feeling the stones. That is, first the projects would be experimented on a pilot basis and then it would be implemented nationwide. But we will see that the pilot projects based experimentation also came down. In the year 2010, 500 policies were experimented on a pilot basis. But in 2016, we will see that this number came down to 70. So from all this we are seeing, or we understand that the Chinese economy is moving away from the ideology or the economic policies it had held some years back. Now the political ideology, the economic principles or the policies of the country is largely undergoing a change. You can find the PDF of this lecture on my Facebook page, and for any queries regarding your UPSC preparations, you can get in touch with me on my Facebook page, or you can email me at joyce.studyIQ@gmail.com. Thank you.